want to address it, somebody in particular, please let us know.
Hi. I'd just like to ask a question of the candidates about how they feel the council can improve the response to the homelessness crisis in the area.
Just come up or speak if you feel comfortable where you are.
What I'd like to point you to is an example in Norwich, where we have a Labour City Council, and they have recently started a new initiative based on the Scandinavian model, which is called Housing First, and it's based on the impression that if you want to sort problems out, if you want to move people forward, if you want to give them a chance to live the life they deserve to live, you have to have the basics, and they see the basics as a house or some sort of housing. So they think from that everything else stems, your health, your well-being, your mental health, education, everything. And what they've done in Norwich is they found an area that they were struggling to use for housing for other purposes, and they reworked it and built some low-cost housing built with timber framing and very good insulation, and created these units for homeless people. Now, some of you may say, but the cost of that? Well, first of all, to the environment, very low, because they were very environmentally friendly houses, helping towards that zero carbon target. But also, you have to think of the cost to society when people don't have basic housing, the effect that has on the local economy, because we're seen as a town that isn't looking after its poorest, that isn't looking after its most vulnerable. The effect on the NHS because of all the illnesses, because of all the drug addiction, and the effect on our policing because of all the low crime that inevitably arises from homelessness. So I say we have to invest, we have to innovate, and that will all even out in the long term if we look after our most vulnerable members of society. Thank you.
Homeless is a difficult issue for every council up and down the country. When I was portfolio holder for housing, homelessness was my responsibility. The number of homeless people within the Bournemouth area at the moment is around 20, at the last count I was aware of. 6 months ago, it was over 80. The homeless situation tends to increase in the summer months as people tend to migrate down to Bournemouth because it's a nice place to be. One of the things that we have done when I was portfolio holder, I set up a company called Seascape Homes, where we borrowed 45 million from the government to purchase and renovate and house homeless people in properties up and around the Bournemouth area. These included detached houses, flats, etc., etc. One of the major problems of the councils face is when a person is made homeless, the council has a responsibility to try and accommodate, literally in more ways than one, that person, especially if they're a young single person with children. And one of the ways in the past which that has happened is that people are being put in B&B. B&Bs tend to be expensive. They can be up to £100 a night. And while you're trying to find a home for that person, they could be in that B&B for anything up to 4 or 5 weeks or more. That's why I set up a company called Seascape. You may see the vans, but there's two Seascapes. The vans are for the building maintenance company, which maintains the council housing. And Seascape Homes is a property company which purchases properties within the Bournemouth and now the BCP area to house people who have been unfortunately made homeless. It's a difficult issue. It's not one that is easily surmountable. It is achievable, but it's difficult. And you must be aware that there are differences between people who are homeless and people who do not want to be housed. We were one of the first councils up in the country to sign up to the Armed Forces Covenant. We do find quite a number of ex-military people who are homeless. When I've been out on homeless counts in Bournemouth from midnight till 4 or 5 in the morning, every council up and down the country has to do an annual count to supply those figures to the government. And I've been out as a councillor to do those counts with experienced people. And you do find quite a number are ex-military people who just prefer, for one reason or another, to live on the streets. And when I approached them as being in the military myself, they said, sorry, leave me alone, I prefer to live under the stars. But the man who asked the question, homeless is a difficult issue for councils up and down the country. And I hate to say it, it's one that is not easily eliminated. And I mean that in the kindest way. As I said earlier, the last count I seen, which is a couple of weeks ago, there are round about 20 people who are classified as homeless within the Bournemouth area. 6 months ago, that was over 80. So it is coming down. Whether it'll ever be eliminated is a difficult question to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add something to that, or are we allowed to or not?
Shall we let them reply and then who said that? Let's
Yeah.
response first.
Could I just say very quickly here, it should be very high on our priority list, because I'm sure you're like me, every time you see a person suffering in the street, it has a tremendous impact on your own happiness and your own well-being. So for me, it would be very high on my list of priorities.
And we mustn't forget about all the families that are in insecure homes, and children don't know whether they'll be living there for more than 6 months on an issued short-hold tenancy agreement. And I often wonder, I was brought up in a home that was in my family from the day I was born until the day I left home. And I can't imagine what it must be like for families not knowing where they're going to be living this time next year. And I think we need more social housing, decent social housing, not just shoeboxes for single people, proper social housing. And instead of having so many second luxury apartments for second homeowners, and you know, we need more social housing. And so many Airbnbs now in Bournemouth. When I first came here in 2015, the rents in Bournemouth was quite low. Investors used to say it wasn't worth buying property locally because the return on their investment wouldn't be great. But now it's completely the opposite. The rents are so high, and I see people all the time on local Facebook pages who can't find anywhere to live. Single people, families, and I just think there's got to be more available housing, whether we build it or we're not building the right kind of housing.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that, one of the things that I did when I retired from being a head teacher was to retrain as a counsellor, and I still do some part-time counselling. And I think one of the issues attached to homelessness is the fact that mental health is underfunded in this country. It needs much more in the way of resources and many more people being trained to act as counsellors and psychotherapists. One of the types of support that those who are homeless need is counselling, to work with them, help them resolve the issues that have brought them to where they are, and help them to create a new life for themselves. Sadly, the funding for that, I think, is a national problem. It's down to government to provide the funding that's required. But that's something that the council can lobby on and should. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I pass this to the green and then back to the blue? And then there's Lizzie and over there. Jenny's watching for you.
Oh, okay. So I think I'd like to echo a lot of what the other candidates have said. It will take a joined up approach to sort out homelessness. That's something we definitely need. I can speak to that in the NHS. It's hard enough for us to cooperate within the NHS across different trusts, what with the horrors of the internal market and whatnot, let alone when it comes to cooperating with the police, with local authorities and all of that. So all of that needs sorting out. None of us are going to be able to do that on this stage. It's about the local elections and what we can do at a local level. All of the solutions to homelessness that we can participate in at a local level, at a council level, really take quite clever targeting. They cannot be one big, one-size-fits-all solution. You know, that is not how you deal with homelessness. That's not how you deal with any problem. The problem is the way our current political parties are set up, whether it's Labour, Conservatives or Lib Dem. All they can do are great big one-size-fits-all solutions. And the example I always come to, I love cycling. It's how I got here today. I came here on my bike. Look at the White Leg Way cycle lane, where instead of spending that money wisely, lots of very clever little small improvements across the city, which would have been wonderful, instead you have a great big virtual vanity project of going, here you go, millions on a cycle lane, that will sort it out. That didn't sort out cycling. We could spend millions on homelessness and we could not solve it unless we have grassroots action from a bottom-up, cleverly developed solutions. And that only comes when you have councillors who are really in tune with the populace, who are beholden to the electorate. There are no Green councillors who get in easy. Every Green councillor has to work because nobody votes for a Green because of the colour of their rosette. Whereas there are seats up and down the country right now where if you've got the right colour rosette on, you will get in. That does not give you good politicians. Voting for, I'm sure you guys are all lovely in your own way, but voting for any of these people here, for the big parties, who can basically count on your vote because that's who your parents voted for, that's who your friends vote for, they will not deliver. They are not as accountable, and they are whipped into voting against their interests. I could bang on about, what is it, Crossroads car park, and how that's going to be developed, but I'm probably at time now, aren't I?
Let's not.
Yes, perhaps we can come back to reality. Can I point out that one thing that we're talking about homelessness, and as Councillor Lawton said, that there is only 20 people at the moment. But the biggest issue that we've had, and it's been a wonderful achievement, as you know what's happened with a certain gentleman called Mr. Putin, and believe me, the amount of people from the Ukraine that have been housed in Bournemouth is quite phenomenal, and I think it's something that we should all be proud of, and certainly we, as the ruling party, are very proud of what has gone on. Thank you.
And just to follow up on the question of homelessness and forces veterans, can I say that I'm ex-forces, and we do have the ex-forces charities here in Bournemouth working hard, where we've got accommodation for ex-service personnel if they want it. So we're working closely with our local charities. So any ex-forces we are trying to house. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Now we're going to go to Lizzie over there.
Yeah, this is off the back of
And then we're
the...
going to go to that.
Sorry.
Can I say something else on homelessness, or did you want to comment on something?
I'd just like to comment on our Mayor's figure of 20 homeless people in Bournemouth. So I work with Bee Mission, who have been feeding the homeless 3 times a week for the last 3 years. Every Tuesday I go out into Bournemouth and feed the homeless. Every single Tuesday we run out of food at 50 meals, at 50 people. That's 3 stops in Bournemouth Town Centre. That's not going into Westbourne, Boscombe, Springbourne. That's Bournemouth Town Centre. So I'd love to know where you got those figures from.
Just see if it's working.
Hello? The other thing I wanted to say, if
it's on.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say, that follows on from what our friend at the back has just said, that in terms of homelessness, there is also looking at the roots of homelessness and the causes of homelessness, and things around lack of tenure in housing and people being evicted and things like this, a cost of living crisis that people are going through. So there's not only the bricks and mortar issue, but there is also the causes, the reasons why, and actually finding a way of actually trying to tackle those and help people locally to get through whatever issues it is that are making them homeless in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I raise a couple of different questions?
Sorry?
Can I raise a couple of different questions?
I think so.
Yeah, firstly, can I ask the gentleman from the Conservatives if he'll distance himself from the lie that grooming gangs are all from one community. In fact, the statistics and the evidence suggest that grooming gangs, the grooming of children happens across all communities and is not specific to one particular community, as one of his leading people in Parliament said, and it's a complete lie. And I can tell you that the statistics suggest that grooming of children happens in all communities, and it happens in sports societies, it happens in religious organisations, and as an ex-Catholic I can guarantee that happens. So I think we should be just careful when we're talking about this, not to spread a lie that was spread by his government about this all being belonging to one community, because that's a racist lie we should distance ourselves from. Can I just raise two other questions? If the gentleman is going to claim the credit for Southbourne Grove, will he also accept responsibility for the shambles that is the centre of Bournemouth? Can I ask, is planning permission given on the same basis that PPE contracts were given? On the basis of who you know in the pub and who's your mates and all that sort of stuff? Or are they actually open and public and given on the basis of what's good for the people of this area? Thank you.
If he was referring to me about child grooming, I was making the point, not just in Southbourne, it's all over, but we do have a problem. And if you don't think so, you get out on the doorstep like I have, and people are telling me...
I'm saying it's not specific to one community.
No, I didn't say that. I pointed out that we do have a...
The Secretary of State said that. The Secretary of State, your Secretary of State said that.
Said what?
That it's particular to one community.
Can we keep
Which
it...
community was he talking about?
Can we keep it local, please? And I think that Eddie has said that this is an issue, and I think...
It's what I'm finding on the doorstep, and if you want the true facts and figures, as I've said, get the PCC, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and I dare say, I've listened to 2 weeks ago at his presentation, and it is an eye-opener. And being out on the street this last 2 or 3 weeks, and people saying we haven't got a problem here locally in Southbourne, well, I can't divulge because the police are not here, because I'm working closely with the police and all the children's services and everybody else locally within the council. So I can't divulge personal, but I can tell you, right on our doorstep, we do have a problem. And if you want proof, I've got emails.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Was there another question, please? Jenny has the mic there.
Yeah, it's going back to the homelessness question. I mean, I'd be also interested to understand what the definition is. If you say the number is 2, it feels like a very specific definition that would yield that number. But I'm interested in a wider issue, which is housing, and housing as a general problem. And I was curious, in this age of transparency, I wonder how many of you own a second property which you generate rent from. Anybody like to admit to that on the stand at all? Definitely nobody.
It's a bit of an unfair question.
I don't think it's
I've got a question that perhaps they can answer in a political way.
I think it's a perfectly valid question. In a place that's got a housing crisis and there's a lack of supply in this area, people with 2 houses should be prepared to own up to that.
Okay, so any answer? Yes,
First of all, I think it's a totally valid question. I get the impression from the various shakings of heads that nobody in the panel is actually in that situation. But what I would say is we need to be looking at the issue of housing in the wider council area. There are a lot of unoccupied premises. We need to be doing something about that. And when it comes to building new properties, we need to be looking at the brownfield sites, and we need to be avoiding green spaces and keep the area pleasant for people whilst developing the housing that is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Just on the same issue quickly here, and then we'll go to that.
I thought that was a really good question and a fair question, but the bit that we keep shying away from is the lack of social and council housing, not just in Bournemouth. I mean, this was the big idea of the 1980s and the Conservatives, and it's come to bite us really, really hard. And then if we move the clock forward 40 years, it appears, as a citizen of Bournemouth, that in recent years the council's focus has been on prestige developments, developed through a company called Future Places. That ain't going to solve the problem of people who don't have houses. And I'm looking, we're all, you know, quite a mature gathering here, but there are a few youngsters here, and I think everyone is just thinking, well, how long is this going to go on? What's it going to be like for young people when they want to own a home? Yeah, I met someone canvassing recently who was 30 and living with their mum, and still couldn't see any prospect of getting out of that. And that didn't used to be the case. And they know why. We all know why. We don't build council houses.
Thank you, Simon.
Can I just say that we are building council houses locally, but you've got to buy the land or get the land to start with, and it costs money. And, you know, we are doing, if you look at our record over the last 4 years on council houses and plots that we've managed to get, I think is pretty good. So when you're saying we haven't built any, we'll go and look at the last 4 years and look what we've built. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you. We'll leave that for the minute because we're over here.
Sorry, we're wondering how many council houses are being built?
I don't want this to become a kind of defending match. We have got another question here. We have others at the floor here.
Do you actually know how many?
Yes. Okay, thank you. One of the things, and I know the discussion was shut down earlier about the car park, but can I ask the councillors that are at the moment in charge of the council, what other pieces of land you intend to sell off? Because you're talking about buying land, but actually we wouldn't be in the situation we are with prestige beachside apartments being built on what is a car park when you turn around and say we're going to sort the car parking out in Southbourne. We wouldn't be in that situation if you hadn't sold. No, you're not. But why not? You know, wouldn't it be great if that was the case? No, it's for the people that can afford lots and lots of money for what is prestigious housing, and then you tell us you're going to sort the car parking out. What else are you going to sell off that is actually belonging to the people of Bournemouth? And for property development, for fat cats that will make a fortune from other fat cats that will come down at weekends and actually not be part of our community, but just enjoy the space that is created by this very special community.
So while we talking... No. Just conferring, sorry, we've got someone else here. Oh, I thought there was this lady here. Right.
Right, I just wanted to just link slightly back to the child exploitation. I'm interested to know what the candidates would like to do about the failing children's services in Bournemouth and how they would approach that issue in terms of improving things and safety for children. I'd like to know about the failing children's services in Bournemouth, the PCP, and what the council...
Can I tell you, we're not failing. Can I tell you, we've pumped in £30 million into children's services this year.
And what
Now let me put it into context. When the Liberal Alliance was in power for the time, they pumped in the princely sum of £900,000 against our 30 million. So, you know, we've really pumped vast amounts of money in. And if, you know, perhaps I can say whilst we're on this, we've also pumped, you know, we've thought of the vulnerable, we've been talking about housing, we've talked about the vulnerable adults, we've pumped a further £25.5 million into that sector as well. So we've put £55.5 million in the last year into those two sectors. And you know, and when you say children's services, as we said, I was the cabinet member, and I think, you know, that's pretty good to say that it's failing because it's
Well, I do know actually, because I work in quality assurance and children's services.
Can I also say, in addition to that, in addition to all that money that we put in, we still have been voted as one of the best financially sound councils, and this was in, this was in the national papers. This is true. We've still got a balance of £10 million, which will be if we're back in power, that will be spent again. But you cannot take away the fact that we've pumped in £55.5 million
And it's achieved absolutely nothing. And I'd like to know what the other candidates might do differently, please.
How much profit did you make on that 55 million? How much was your cut?
I just realised that we never answered this lady's question over there. You asked a question, didn't you, about the car parks? What other plots of land are planned to be sold off? So maybe we should go back to that.
Yeah. Joe, did you want to
say something about the situation with children's services is that a year and a half ago we were deemed unsatisfactory as provider for children's services. Ofsted came back again last October, and whilst they said under the careful guidance of the current child service lead things are improving, but I'll read from the Ofsted that was only last October. Some children are still experiencing delays in getting help and protection, and by that I mean the most vulnerable children. There is an absence of clear, unified approach, poor planning, and a lack of depth of analysing the underlying reasons for chronic neglect, all linked to domestic violence. So I'm very disturbed that the gentleman thinks that that's an improved service and is fine, despite how much money is being ploughed in. And perhaps the money needs ploughing in a better way that leads to more joint linked services. We need schools, we need social workers, we need mental health care, all working in a joint way, not just passing the buck. Thank you.
Going back to what you were saying about the lady over there was saying about the parking, and I think you made the statement to say that you are going to address the parking issue in Bournemouth. Now, how are you going to address it when you're getting rid of car parks? What is the plan to actually address, to improve the parking, especially with summer coming up? We're losing a car park. And as for what we're building on it, that is also ludicrous when we do have so many people, ordinary working people earning ordinary working salaries, cannot afford the rentals of these high-priced properties. So what are you going to do about it?
We've got one down here, Jenny. Oh, I'm going to ask our member of the Green Party in it because he hasn't spoken for a long time.
I just wanted to own up to my multi-million-pound property portfolio first of all. So I'd like to respond to a few of the questions on behalf of my colleagues who can't be here, who I'd advocate voting for them. All of the questions were being asked about failing children's services, homelessness. I mean, it's basically the same thing. They're all failing, you know. We could talk about the failing parks, you know, the fact that they're not maintained. We could talk about social care. All of those things are broken and do not function. Now that is because it's not simply a lack of money. These are endemic, these are problems that are endemic to our social system at the moment because it's the way it's set up. None of these are bugs, these are features, they are intentional. Now the only way we will solve these problems of homelessness, social care, falling that social care is awful, children's services is awful. As someone who's adopted 2 children, I can tell you, children's services are terrifyingly bad. Everything needs reform. It needs root and branch reform. Now that reform will not happen while the people who are in positions of power benefit from a system being broken or are beholden to organisations that benefit to those systems being broken. No matter how wonderful the intentions are of anybody on this stage and how much integrity they have or how good they are at counting homeless people, ultimately they will vote with the party whip. That is what gets them their seat. They are beholden to a party whip. That is not the case with your independent candidates and your Green candidates, and that is council elections, parliamentary elections. That is the only way we will solve these problems. We cannot solve it with the politicians we have had for the last 30 years. There we go, I'll get off my soapbox.
Would you like to speak? Would you like to ask a question?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I feel a little bit uncomfortable because I'm a DFL, as some of you are. So I'm one of these people that moved to the area with all this money and bought 14 houses and this, that and the other. I didn't. I have one very nice house. But the one thing that I keep continuing to hear, everything needs money. And the big thing that I'm hearing all the time is the council's bankrupt. Not one of you has spoken about how we're going to get out of the problem we're in first of all, before we take it forward. I love everything you've all said, but there's not one person that said what we need to address first of all is this. Answer me, are we actually bankrupt? What does bankruptcy of a council actually mean? Sorry, there's 4 questions, but I hope you'll... Thank you.
I can answer that in one word. No, we are not bankrupt. The council is not bankrupt.
It's a balanced budget.
I'm sorry, you but the council is not bankrupt. If it was bankrupt, you'd be in real problems.
So why was your government considering sending commissioners there?
What?
Why was your government considering sending commissioners if you're not?
No, they weren't.
It was all on purpose.
No, they weren't. They weren't. Don't talk rubbish. I'm sorry, you can't make a statement that was not.
I think we're going to have to accept some things, and we've got Jeff who's going to talk now.
A couple of things have been said I'd like to comment on if I may. One is council finances. I said I've been a councillor before. I've actually been foolish enough to allow myself to be elected a few times. I've done 20 years as a councillor in London, and in that time I have seen through, I don't mean my personal responsibility, but I voted for 20 different council budgets. In all that time, I have never seen an auditor's letter sent to the council prior to budget making of the kind that was sent to this council this year by the council's auditors, saying that their strategy was putting the council finances at risk. Never seen it before. In terms of whether the council is bankrupt, the answer is don't know. Because this administration keeps things so close, it is impossible to know exactly what is going on. And that's one of the reasons why we have not made any promises about what we would do in expenditure. We can't afford to make promises. We've got to find out what's going on, first of all, because the current administration keeps it all secret. A couple of other quick ones, if I may. Children's Services is one of the reasons that I decided to get involved in local politics here, because of seeing the Ofsted report that deemed children's services to be inadequate, and seeing that Ofsted were putting one of their officers over and above the Director of Children's Services to give firm guidance as to what needed to happen. And that is the real reason that the Conservative administration had to put more money into children's services, because it was inadequate. And land for housing, first of all, we did put in, as did so many residents, formal objections to the Southbourne Crossroads development. And it's sad that it turned out the way that it did. What other land might be designated? Well, we know that a year ago, Beaufort Play Park, the only play park for children in the West Southbourne ward that Brian and I are standing for, was being considered by the council for housing, which is a shame. I give credit to those who organised the Protect Our Play Parks group, who fought that off a year ago. I get worried that the reason that the council backed down, and I have to say this administration, is because of the elections, and they realised how unpopular it would be, and I'm worried that that proposal might come back if we have another Conservative administration running this council. Thank you.
Could I ask each of the parties to give us a view, their vision of how they're going to solve the traffic problems that we have in Bournemouth? It's not just a case of car parking for visitors, it's a case of our streets, our suburban streets, cluttered with vehicles on both sides of the road. Often, people have taken to mounting the pavement to the point where if somebody's in a wheelchair or has a Zimmer frame, or even a young mother with a pushchair, they're unable to get through without actually having to step into the street to get round the cars. There's also the issue, of course, of air pollution, with our children breathing in fumes from vehicles. We need a radical answer to how you're going to sort things. It needs to be a long-term answer as well.
I think one of the main concerns, sorry, was that a bit too loud? One of our main concerns is that we're in a very strange situation. Salisbury has, I think, 3 park and rides, Winchester 4. The only park and ride that I know of in Bournemouth is there for a few weeks during the summer. There are no other park and rides and none outside. So all the people who come into Bournemouth to work, all the people who come in to shop, all the people who come on holiday are forced to come into Bournemouth. There's no way out. They have to come here or else walk. So one of the most important things, as far as I'm concerned, in addressing this problem is doing what they're doing in Salisbury, doing what they're doing in Winchester, and on and on and on. So we've got to find ways to create park and ride systems that will work for us, and at the moment we haven't got that. We need to change that, and that will make a big difference. Thank you.
I totally concur with that, and also a really important issue, especially for someone like West Southbourne and other suburban areas, is I think it's time to boost the local economy. So people who are actually having to travel less far to work are able to access their services locally and are able to access leisure opportunities locally. That would make a massive step towards achieving a more zero carbon environment. But just to go back very quickly to the comment about how we are going to fund things and is the council currently bankrupt, I'd just like to point out that over the last 13 years under Tory and, to be fair, Lib Dem austerity, something like 60p out of the pound has been removed from local council funding. So if you want properly funded councils, you need a Labour government. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got two more questions. Where is the question?
Thank you.
Here, this
Hi.
gentleman.
Hello, thank you. Hi there. You talked a lot about national and local issues. Do you think we should be voting on national or local issues in this election? And if it is local issues, could you perhaps give some examples of things you've done for Southbourne?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Should we be...
Should we be?
Sorry, I thought that was a good question. I ran with it.
That's all right. Sorry. Should we be voting on local or national issues in May? And if it's local, can you give examples of things you've done for Southbourne?
The question seems to have stopped.
I presume the question is that you're asking what have we done over the last 3 or 4 years locally, well, can I say that we've funded out of our local improvement fund for Southbourne Tennis Club, Southbourne Bowls Club, the tennis club down at Iford, the BMX track, and we got funding and we supported to get the BMX championships here in Southbourne last year, bringing 5,000 people down over a 3-day event, which boosted the local economy. Now, if you're not saying that we're not active and not doing things, and that's BMX was not just for kids, it was from little ones up to, they had 80-year-olds going round that BMX track, and if you weren't down there, it was something to see. But I mean, that's just a few of the things we've done, and we've just got up here at Newstead Road, 2 of the major shrub borders, which were really overgrown. They went in 2 months ago, cleared that up, reseeded it, and they're looking great. Wick Lane Play Park, they've just had the equipment repaired, and there's new equipment going down there over the summer. Do you want me to go on, or is that just a handful of... I'm just giving you what we've done locally.
Have you got anything better?
Sorry?
Have you got anything better? Is there anything better that you've done that really didn't really cut it?
Well, that's funding we've done out of our local improvement fund.
Oh, that's amazing.
Let's keep to the...
Right. Can I? I've got the microphone, so I'm going. When people talk about what are local issues, it's really difficult, because actually, if you want to do as much as you possibly can to improve the life chances of people living in Southbourne, you will have really, really good schools in the area. You'll have access to really good medical provision, and you'll have really good social care for them. And it's very easy to fight local elections as if it's a parish council and talk about the potholes. I'm really surprised none of you raised potholes, or talk about the benches that need mending and things like that. And I totally agree those things have to be done. And I think actually everybody here would agree on those kind of issues. But actually what separates parties at a national level is the priority and the value that they set at the kind of services that are delivered locally and that change people's lives. And that's why I'm talking schools, medicine, social care in particular. In our ward, we have two really great resources. Actually, one of them is just outside and in the Folkestone ward, just by about 10 yards, which is the Children's Centre, which is used by so many families in this ward, and used to be a Sure Start. Don't get me going on that. Used to be a Sure Start Children's Centre run by the YMCA, really important community resource. And the other one is the community centre at Beaufort, which is that's something we've got to keep our eye on, and what happens to that, because that's a big asset belonging to BCP Council, and it could be something really special.
We have quite a lot of questions on the floor, so if we can keep brief, please. We've got quite a few questions from the audience.
Well, apart from the Seafield Gardens bid for funding that I did earlier on, and it's interesting, at the time I did contact Mr. Coop for his support, but he didn't tell me that he had applied for funding, or I may not have needed to do all the work I did.
I did.
Did you?
Yes,
Okay.
I've got an email here.
All right.
All
right. Okay. Anyway, but also what I've been doing personally has been supporting locals who are very dead set against certain large buildings on their doorstep with very little parking. Because I think one of the issues with parking is all these blocks of flats are being built with no on-site parking. Some near Seafield Road, on Seafield Road, have no parking at all. But the newer developments are being built with very little parking, so their visitors and their second and third cars will all be parked on the pavements outside other people's houses, and also granting planning permission for infill developments in gardens is adding to the parking issues locally as well.
I will try. I'm not embarrassed to admit that I thoroughly enjoy reporting potholes. And I can claim that several roads are a little bit smoother due to those efforts, including Beaufort Road in particular. I have also reported pavements that have needed winter debris to be cleared because they are a slip hazard, including outside some of the elderly residences. Fly tipping that has been reported, that has been cleared away because of those reports. Street lights that have been made to work because of reports that have been made. I was absolutely appalled when I first visited Beaufort Play Park at the condition of that park. I couldn't be brief and describe just how bad it is, both at the same time. I'm just delighted that pressure that we've put on council officers has resulted in painting of the play park starting this week. It remains to be seen just how much they do, but at least there will be some improvement. And Kimberley Road has for 30 years had an eyesore of a plot of land fronting the road, derelict property that is falling down, rusting vehicles inside, the wall at the outside that has collapsed and is in danger of falling further and injuring somebody. Nobody's done anything about it for 30 years. Due to our efforts, the council is now taking the owner to court. Thank you.
From the floor, please. Right, one. Can we first of all go to the floor, because there are quite a few questions. Please, Joe.
This concerns a gentleman who asked about vision, and today we had a brilliant vision from Rob Hopkins of Transition Town. He was talking about a clean, lovely world.
Sue, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Is that better? Yes. Right, today we were at the big one with tens of thousands of people, I don't know how many, having a very good-natured and non-confrontational, I have to say. There were pickets of all our ministers and so on, and we were very interested to hear the speech by Rob Hopkins talking about an absolutely lovely vision of a clean and beautiful world. We will have to decarbonise at speed and scale, not something we're seeing, I'm afraid, in the libraries. We need a environmental literacy programme for all of us to understand exactly what has happened to our poor old beleaguered world. There are leaflets outside that you're welcome to take. And good luck, and there's lots of good ideas in this room, and I wish we could have some citizens' assemblies to deal with all these problems. Thank you very much.
Can we just...
Can I just actually, in response to the gentleman here who mentioned Beaufort Community Centre, I'm very pleased that you're really happy about that, because the fact was that it was me, along with a colleague who sadly is not with us now, Councillor Basil Ratcliffe, and we actually took over that derelict school and transformed to what it is now. I can tell you that single-handed, one Saturday evening, I humped 7 tonne of rubble from the boiler room across into the car park. We got funding from companies, which going back, I'm talking about 30 years now, that Beaufort's been in existence. And I'm very pleased to see that just how successful it is, and you admitting how good it is for the community. But that was solely down. It was Basil Ratcliffe and I that really put all the work, got the funding together, and got even building companies to come in for nothing. And it didn't stop there, because after that, we then had to take over, and we used to devote hours of time. It's a huge building, and believe me, even to paint it is a mind-bending job. And that was done just a few of us, only a matter of about 10 people from the Southbourne area that did it, and that's why you've got that beautiful Beaufort now.
Thank you, Malcolm. You've got 2 questions. Joe would like to respond to what?
I have the 2 questions. I'll respond to more than one.
That's kind of you. Isaac.
I'm too young to vote, and I live in Boston, so it's not like any of you are going to lose a vote. I'm too young to drive, and I don't have a car, so I rely on buses to get around, and it's not very good, I don't think, and they're very expensive. And they've been capped recently by the national government, and that's helped a lot. But I want to know what's going to happen when that ends, when the capping scheme ends. Are the prices going to go up really high as they were before? And also about I know the new bus, like a beach one, with the new, I've seen it with the new paint and the new colours, but I never use it because it's a sort of quite touristy route. And I wonder how much that cost, and if that could have been used to lower fares, because I've got friends who have to, when they have to figure out, they'll get £6 an hour at their work, but they'll have to figure out how much the bus to and from will cost. So I'm just wondering if the council has so much money, could that be used? And also think it would help the traffic and the pollution that people are talking about. So I was just wondering if someone
would like to respond to that.
Can I just, well, the bus services don't come under the local authority. We don't run the bus services. We don't, when we try to put on extra buses, the buses will go and say that we've got extra routes put on, then the bus service comes back and says, it's not profitable, people aren't using it, and then the council have to subsidise a lot of them. But there is a new system just come in the last week or two with a £2 cap on journeys locally. And I've just had an email only the last couple of days that more buses are putting on extra buses in the Southbourne area for the summer season. Well, that's good news, but I mean, I can't answer questions on the other routes because, the bus services aren't run by the local authority.
I'm very struck by the fact you no longer see buses as council responsibility. I would have assumed that having a coordinated and integrated transport system was very much part of council responsibility, and buses are surely a service, not a profit-making enterprise, and maybe that's where the problem lies. And perhaps moving forward we should be following Manchester's example and bringing the bus service back into public ownership.
I don't think we really answered the gentleman's question earlier on when he asked whether we were voting locally or voting on national issues. And quite clearly, there are a lot of local issues. We've been discussing them all tonight. But at the same time, as I think Simon pointed out very well, it's about funding as well. If a council has its funding cut by a national government, to then criticise the council, and I'm critical of the council in lots of ways that I've already expressed, but to criticise it as though it's the fault of the council is a bad mistake. So we need to say when you vote, you are voting on local issues, but you're also voting very much on a national issue. And if you vote for more of the same, you will get more of the same.
Is this working? Yeah?
Charlie's really bursting to say something.
Oh, I see. It sort of follows on from the previous question. But...
Sorry, go then.
Yeah, okay. Sitting here, thank you for organising this. I realised sitting here that it was actually in 1975 that I sat as an anxious young Liberal candidate on this very platform, getting ready for the election then, and I've had quite a few years in the council since then. But really, my disappointment springs from the BCP, the formation of BCP. I was one of the campaigners who really worked hard to try and get the three authorities to come together, because in my experience as a council leader in years gone by, I could see that so many things fell by the way through petty rivalries and not agreeing to talk to other authorities and so on. And now we have that opportunity, and quite aside from a financial benefit, which there should have been, had perhaps the council not been involved in other more vanity type of projects, there should have been financial. But taking David's point earlier on about transport systems, I'm so disappointed that we're not thinking a bit bigger. I mean, we've now got an authority with over 400,000 people, the equivalent of Bristol City Council, and I've been fortunate enough to travel the last couple of years. We've been to a lot of European capitals and American ones. And public light transit travel is there in every city we go to. In other words, we're looking at a system which is talking about millions and millions of pounds. But the trouble is, I find in Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch, we think in very small issues. When we think about £3 million comes out from the government, oh, let's widen that road a bit, let's add to that junction. But the fact is, as David said earlier, we can't go on like that. Transport affects the economy, it affects education, it affects everything. And I'm disappointed, really, certainly in the BCP Council since it was formed, that we haven't got a higher, better vision, something a bit bigger, because if we haven't, when the government, as they will, inevitably, get round to saying to local authorities, we want to bring in new transport systems here, the councils that have got a plan, the ones that have got a plan, are going to be the ones who get the lolly. And it disappoints me that we seem to go on piecemeal, doing bits of this and bits of that, but actually we need a big picture. Has nobody got a big picture of what we want to see? Do you?
Joe, it looks as though it's your turn.
So I feel like there have been a ton of questions that I'd really like to respond to, and I think some of them were really good. The tricky ones are good, you know. The tricky ones are the ones that deserve to get asked. The one about finances, I think is the most interesting one, because much as we might say we don't know what the finances are like, we know that, I don't have the right language to use, but we know they're bad, yeah? We know it is, but we would be afraid to open our bank statements. If the council was a person, you wouldn't open your bank statements. You know, you just put them straight in the bin. You know they're bad. That's where it is. And dealing with that is going to be hard. There are some creative things that you can do. One thing I really like is the idea of some rebanding on council tax and actually looking at not just the value of the property, but I think second homes, I think they should pay. It's never made sense to me. You know, that's the kind of change you will not get with status quo politicians. When we're talking about transport, I'll be a wee bit long, so I'm going to smash out all the questions, then I'll pipe down again. Transport, as somebody who doesn't have access to a car, who gets everywhere by bus and bike, with my children on the bus as well, I would say that I do not think the problems with our bus services are going to be solved by people who've no experience using them. When we talk about local issues and national issues and all of that, who do you vote for? Ultimately, you are voting for an advocate for your community. I would vote for somebody who shares your concerns and understands your problems. Those are the only people who can sort them out. Transport problems need a really hyper-local approach. They cannot be top-down. As much as lovely big project ideas are good, those will need buy-in from users in advance. You know, park and ride and all of that. Chances are, no matter how brilliant these local elections are, we are looking at a government of millionaires, whether or not it's red or blue who gets in. Now, those people will have very little empathy and understanding of the situation of all of us here in Bournemouth. I'll pipe down in a second. Again, root and branch reform. We need different politicians, different types of politicians who are not beholden to millionaires and their party to keep them in. You will only get that with the independents and the Greens. I will pipe down. I wish I could be on this stage and respond to everything, guys. I'm very sorry.
To a point now where, are there any other questions? The questions have been brilliant and thank you for the responses, but are there any questions from the floor now? Here we go.
Talking about finances of the council, and you say we're not in the red or anything, why is it that several times there's been huge headlines in papers, local and national, where they're saying that BCP is the most corrupt council in the whole of the UK?
Can I just read this out to you? This is something called West Country Voices, and it's a non-partisan newspaper. that examines what goes on in local politics right across the West Country. In 2020, the anti-corruption group Transparency International UK, and these people work internationally. They look at countries and try and find out whether the structures and the laws will actually protect people who live in that country from corrupt practices. They published a paper on the potential for corruption in English local authorities. 50 key councils were assessed on how they manage corruption risks, such as lobbying, oversight and conflicts of interest. One council was deemed by far the worst in England. Do you want me to go any further?
When was that report published? 2020?
Yes.
Oh, really? Yes. That means the Libs and Labour are in charge then. We never came into power until 18 months ago, thank you.
So nothing to do with you? No.
No, nothing. Are you accusing me of being corrupt?
No.
Thank you. None of us on this stage, I believe, will be corrupt. That you've said your say.
Whoa, now
We have been, no council up and down the country can publish accounts unless they are being audited. The accounts of Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch are being audited and declared clean. We have shown a £10 million profit. There is not, as far as I am aware, since I have been a councillor, any councillor or officer that I am aware of who is corrupt. I have never come across it in my life. I've come across it in private industry. I've never come across it in local government. I find the inference from that paper disgusting. And you should be disgusting as people who pay your council tax to think that the people on this stage are corrupt. None of us, and I include the opposition people, are corrupt, and we are certainly not corrupt. Let me just tell you, I was born in Liverpool, I was raised on a council estate. I am not a rich Tory. None of us here are rich Tories. We are passionate about what we believe in. We are passionate about Southbourne. We are passionate about Bournemouth. None of us are corrupt. I have never been offered a corrupt or a bribe in my life. I have been offered in industry. Myself and Malcolm are on the planning board. We do our best on planning board and we do a lot of good work on planning board. You may not or may not be aware, people think that we are all for flats. On Bellevue Road, opposite the Bristol Hotel, I stopped personally, along with our other councillor, building of flats there to knock all of those bungalows away and build flats for rich people. I personally stopped that. I spent months. We had 2 inspections from the inspectorate and we won both appeals. Please do not accuse us of just building flats willy-nilly. I do really take offence at anybody accusing me of being corrupt. I don't need a bribe to do what I do. I do what I do for the people of Bournemouth and the people of Southbourne. Please.
Why did the last leader resign?
The last leader resigned because he couldn't do what he wanted to do, and he threw his dummy out the pram. End of story.
Thank you. I think we're coming towards the end of. Yeah, we will. But
hello.
Hello.
Opportunity to
yes.
speak.
Can I just? Yes, I will let you speak. We're coming towards the end of our time, and we want to keep it on a positive note, and we want these lovely people to encourage us to vote for them. So if we can keep it as positive, so that we don't go home in a bad mood, please. Thank you.
Well, I'll start by being positive, and I'll take it away from politics totally, because I'm sick of this country. One party knocking the other party, and I'd never be a politician, certainly in opposition, or in power, because the opposition can always get it right and we can never get it right. For example, I want to get back to a priority which will address almost everything, I think, and it's what Mr. Coop said earlier on about the youth of this community, because they are the future, and most of us here are either parents or even grandparents, and we seriously fear for their well-being. I wouldn't want any of my grandchildren going into the centre of Bournemouth now, because it's the pits and it's a risk. And not only that, we come back to the local side of things. We've got a centre at Hainsbury Head, which unfortunately is closed. I would certainly like Mr Cooper and the party to see if that can be reignited, because Brockenhurst College has given it up. And sadly, when we talk about looking after our youth and the future, indeed the past, and I have to say, in the 50s and 60s, we had the same housing problem that we have now. We didn't have car ownership, and we didn't have televisions with 50 channels. We didn't even have a 12-inch black and white. That's history. So I think the expectations of society are greater now, and that's why we get so much promotion about hardships. If it's really all that hard, why have we got a parking problem or car problem? Because everyone's owning them, and it's an expectation. But if you know, we're in the United Reformed Church building here. There's one over at Christchurch that's been selling its hall at the back, built by my father for the local youth, and the ground for development. I'm not going to get onto the religious argument, but that's made me put in an objection to that application. And I find it very sad that a church is going to close and the youth of that community over at Watford is going to suffer. So I think, to end on a positive note, whichever party, whoever is in, we must look after the youth of our community, their security and safety, just as Eddie said at the outset. And I only remember two people, one who said she's got a list of everything that we can look at afterwards, and Eddie talking about the youth of our community and their safety. Thank you.
So could we have some comments on youth as we start to go to the finish? Coming to you.
First of all, well, I said, so one of the things that I'm proud of is that when I was responsible for the budget in Kingston Council, we made sure that youth clubs and youth services were not cut in spite of the then Conservative austerity cuts to our overall budget. We do need to provide even more for young people than we do at the moment. I've heard comments about Beaufort Community Centre. It's actually underused. It could be utilised a lot better. But I'm hesitant to make any promises precisely because of the issue that has been raised, the council's finances. We need the chance to get in there and see what really is going on. But yes, youth services provision for young people will be one of our priorities in terms of redistributing the council's finances if we can take control.
Can I give it to Eddie and then back to you, please? Thank you.
Well, you've heard, you know, youth services locally, and that's what we're talking about in West Southbourne and East Southbourne. And can I again tell you what we've put in out of our own local improvement funds to keep some of these youth centres going? And the gentleman there has just mentioned the outdoor education centre at Hainsbury Head. That hopefully will come to fruition later this year, providing I'm re-elected. That is one of my passions. I've been on the board there for 13 years, on the management board of that, when Brockenhurst was running it, and before that. And what a great facility that has been. And my vision, or our vision, is to see a brand new centre there that will adapt for the disabled and everybody, not just youth, but adults, for sailing, canoeing, all water sport and outdoor activity. But we have to get the funding from the organisations that have shown an interest. But, you know, there's 4 or 5, and I'm not too sure at this present moment whether they're the correct 4 or 5, but we'll be looking at those, and hopefully maybe 1 or 2 others come in with the expertise so we can get that up and running in the next 2 years. Thank you.
Okay, just 2 quick points. First of all, the gentleman was talking about have things really changed? Are young people expecting more? And is that the problem? I'd just like to point out housing costs and renting costs and general living costs are so high now. We've really done a number on our young people. Their ability to leave home and to find their own place to live, their ability to study, their ability to feed themselves. There was a time back in the 50s where one person in the family could work and earn enough to live, and now we're finding at least both people in the family have to work in order to live some sort of comfortable lifestyle, and young people are suffering on the back of austerity. And I feel we owe them an apology, not saying that they just expect more and are somehow greedy. And the other thing I wanted to say was that youth services and provision for young people has been cut to the quick. We have no youth clubs here apart from, I think, one. Is there one here at the moment? But one here. But over in Beaufort, you want people to be able to walk to their youth service. You don't want them to have to catch a bus. And we've got nothing at Beaufort Community Centre. So that needs developing, and that's certainly something Simon and I have been discussing, and how that centre could be used more proactively. Thank you.
The questions have been very varied, and thank you very much for those. We did say that we'd finish at 8:30, and then there's more refreshments. You're welcome to have more refreshments, as long as you're out by 9 o'clock. But thank you so much for to the candidates, because it's quite a brave thing to be sitting here. I know they want your votes, but it's still quite a brave thing. So maybe we could say, is it appropriate to say thank you? Gave up their Friday night, say. So, and so have you, and it's great to see all the faces. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for your questions. I don't think there's very much more that I have to say. So
thank you to you.
To who? Thank you to Joe.